Welcome to Book by Book. We are right now walking through the Old Testament book of Isaiah. We have moved through the first 27 chapters of Isaiah, and in this lesson we're going to look at chapters 28 through 35. Now, Isaiah 28 through 35 plays a very similar role to Isaiah chapters 1 through 6. Isaiah 28 through 35 shouldn't be seen as what follows chapter 27, but as what introduces Isaiah chapter 36. The first 6 chapters of Isaiah were a series of prophecies, parables, a heavenly vision that were designed to prepare the reader for the narrative section in Isaiah 7. That moment when the Lord called upon King Ahaz to put his trust in Yahweh, to forsake his alliance with Assyria and trust that the Lord could deliver him from the pair of nations above him, Israel and Syria, who were preparing to attack Judah. And sadly, as we looked at earlier in the series, Ahaz rejected the offer of support and help and grace from the Lord and ended up turning instead to the Assyrians. He would sacrifice one of his own sons through the fires to the Assyrian gods and followed their pagan worship practices. So what followed Isaiah chapter 7 was a series of judgments and woes upon Judah and all of the nations around Judah. And in the midst of those judgments, though, we need to remember that there was hope. There was hope that was given for those who would continue to trust in Yahweh even while all of their nation, their political leaders had turned their back on the Lord. And the source of hope that we see starting in Isaiah chapter 7 is Emmanuel, who I also believe is pictured as Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, predicting the devastation and the judgment during Isaiah's time, and then also in the child, which we get from our famous Christmas prophecies, and then the sprout kingdom that we see in Isaiah as well. And so following those prophecies of judgment, the hope that they can have in the one day coming Messiah, now we get to Isaiah 28 through 35. And these chapters are meant to prepare the reader for the coming narrative section in Isaiah 36 through 39. And he will prepare us for that narrative section so that we can be individuals who will trust in the Lord against overwhelming odds, against a vastly superior opponent, which is what Judah will see during the days of Hezekiah, seeing a force that's out to get them that is even greater than the combined power of Israel and Syria during the days of Ahaz. Now, God prepares Judah to trust in him through a series of 6 woes. 6 woes that will tell the people of Judah, don't trust in Egypt. Don't trust in the nations around you for help against Assyria. You have hope in only one place, and that is the Lord your God. So there are a series of woes that are given against those who will trust in Egypt and in the surrounding nations. And then there is hope that is given in the final chapter of this section, a hope on God's kingdom, which we believe today is a prophecy of the end times, the millennial kingdom, or the new heaven and the new earth. So if we want to break down this section in Isaiah, look at it in the divisions that I believe Isaiah originally intended it to have. Each new section will begin with a woe. So a woe of destruction, a woe of judgment, and this is our 6 sections of this portion of Scripture brought to us by this one word that Isaiah uses to begin each prophecy. Woe number 1 is in Isaiah chapter 28. Woe number 1 is judgment on Ephraim and Jerusalem. Or we could also say it's judgment on the divided kingdom, Israel and Judah. And in the midst of this section, we will also find hope for God's people who trust in him. Hope that's based upon the cornerstone in Zion. So most likely this is another title, this is another picture of Emmanuel that we originally saw back in Isaiah chapter 7. So if you want to say which Old Testament book is dominated the most by prophecies and imagery of Jesus Christ, it is clearly the book of Isaiah. So we see the prophecy of the cornerstone in Isaiah 28, 16, and 17. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation firmly placed. He who believes in it will not be disturbed. I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the level. Then hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the secret place. So the Lord promises deliverance for those who will rest on the cornerstone, and he promises judgment. And specifically, this is judgment on some individuals who somehow made a covenant with Sheol. And Sheol was the resting place of the dead in the Old Testament scriptures. So there must have been some type of cult where people made some deal with the abode of the dead, and they said, we made a pact with them, so we don't need to worry about dying from Assyria because we have our own God, Sheol, who we trust in. And in the first woe, God is saying, woe to those who trust in your pact with Sheol. Instead, rest upon the cornerstone. Woe number 2 comes in Isaiah chapter 29. It is Isaiah chapter 29, verses 1 through 14. This is a dual judgment, so a woe upon two groups of people. The first woe comes upon Ariel. And there's some slight difficulty on knowing who this Ariel is. Most likely Ariel is another name for Jerusalem. And the woe is that Jerusalem will be besieged. They will be surrounded by forces who will attack Jerusalem and then set up ramparts against the walls of Jerusalem, which this lines up really well with what we're going to see in the fulfillment of this prophecy in Isaiah 36 and 37. And then also the second woe is not only, in this section, is not only against Ariel, but it is against those who will besiege the city of Ariel or the city of Jerusalem. So woe upon both Jerusalem and upon those who will attack the city itself. And in the midst of this second woe, we have a famous line on the character of God's people during the life of Isaiah, and it will also be repeated by Jesus in his own life. Isaiah 29, 13 and 14 says, Then the Lord said, Because the people draw near with their words and honor me with their lip service, but they remove their hearts far from me. And their reverence for me consists of tradition learned by rote. Therefore, behold, I will once again deal marvelously with these people, wondrously marvelous. And the wisdom of their wise men will perish, and the discernment of their discerning men will be concealed. So what we learn is that just like in the time of Jesus, so too in the time of Isaiah, the leaders, especially the religious establishment in Jerusalem, in Judah, they will look fully devoted to God, but it will be entirely external. They will have a religion without real worship. They'll give offerings to God, but will withhold their heart from God, and to them the second woe has been pronounced. The third woe also takes place in Isaiah 29. It is Isaiah 29, verses 15 through 24. And this is the shortest section. It is simply a judgment on those who believe that in their pride they can hide their sin from the Lord. So woe to those who believe that they can sin before the Lord and have it remain hidden and not be seen by the judge. Woe number 4 is Isaiah 30, verses 1 through 33. So the entire chapter of Isaiah chapter 30. And this is judgment on those who place their trust in Egypt. This is a specific call to Hezekiah. Do not make the mistake of your grandfather Ahaz. Ahaz went and depended upon Assyria, sacrificed his sons to the Assyrian gods, and Isaiah is saying, Hezekiah, don't do the same thing. Don't go south to Egypt and trust in Egypt to protect you from the Assyrians. But instead, you need to call on the Lord your God and place your trust in Him. And in verse 18, we see the summary of that call to trust in the Lord. Therefore, the Lord longs to be gracious to you and therefore he waits on high to have compassion on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. How blessed are all those who long for him. When I was reading through Isaiah chapter 30, that verse just struck me. I'm like, how is that verse so overlooked? How do we not know this as well as Psalm 23 or as John 3:16? What an amazing understanding of who our God is. Our God is a God who longs to show us grace, who gives us his love. He is also a God of justice and equity for his people, and we are blessed when we look to him. And so we have wonderful promises about the character of the Messiah, about the character of our God, the importance of trusting in him in the midst of these 6 woes. And that makes a lot of sense when you understand the context. The context is saying, woe to those who don't depend on God and instead depend upon the nations around them. So, of course, in the midst of that, you're going to intersperse it with information on the importance of being faithful to God, because God will be faithful to us. Woe number 5 is Isaiah chapter 31 and 32. So it takes us from Isaiah 31:1 through Isaiah 32:20. And this is a call to the people of Judah to really weigh on the scale, so to speak, who they will trust in. Will they go down to Egypt and face the 5th woe for those who lean upon the splintered staff of Egypt? Or will they trust in the kings of Judah? Will they trust in the leadership that God has given them? So in chapter 31, we have this woe upon Judah, upon those who trust in Egypt. And then chapter 32 is a call to open your eyes and to see the king that God has placed before you, who can guide you in righteousness and toward worship to the Lord. And we know the ultimate Davidic king that we will hope and trust in, and that is the Son of David, Jesus Christ. But also, I think this poem, specifically in Isaiah 32, can be pointing to Hezekiah, as Hezekiah will be leading the people of Judah to place their faith and their trust in the Lord instead of depending upon their neighbors and the nations that are around them. So in Isaiah 32:1 and 2, we read, "Behold, a king will reign righteously, and princes will rule justly. Each will be like a refuge from the wind and a shelter from the storm, like streams of water in a dry country, like the shade of a rock in a parched land." And so the language of princes for me in this chapter points more toward the Davidic line in general as opposed to the Messiah himself. So the people are told that when your king is walking righteously in the Lord, when his sons are raised in godliness, follow them. Go toward the Lord in worship and trust and dependence. But always the big problem for Judah is that there is no consistency in their kings leading them where they need to go. I mean, just look at what we're going to see in the line of the 4 kings that will come, starting with Hezekiah, who we're going to see in the next lesson that we have. Hezekiah was a great king. He might have been one of the best of Judah's kings. I mean, in my own mind, I got David, and then right below him, I got Hezekiah as my second, even above Solomon and all of his great accomplishments. But Hezekiah's son Manasseh was horrible. He was a terrible king. Manasseh's son Amnon, Hezekiah's grandson, horrible as well, just as terrible as his dad. And then we have Amnon's son Josiah, and once again, Josiah was a good king. I mean, this is as bad as trying to follow American politicians who come one after another. One king is terrible, the next king is good, and even though we have a hard time in America going from people that we see as good and quality presidents to poor and deceitful presidents, we can at least say that we've never had a president of the United States who has promoted idolatrous prostitution or burned his own son to death. And that was what the people of Judah were facing. So while the Jews are called to follow upon the righteous kings, we need to in some way understand how difficult this would be to do when the kings are flopping back and forth from those who will worship Judah and those who will abandon him. And then Isaiah also in this section in chapter 32, verse 9, begins to speak judgment upon wealthy women in Judah, those who will refuse to listen to God's prophets and will not reform their way. And we can understand why this information needs to be brought up, is that you have these leaders in the nation of Judah who say, I will reject the Lord, and their families go right along with them. The sixth and final woe of this section comes in chapter 33, where 2 chapters of judgment are delivered from the Lord. Judgment upon the nations who surround Judah. Now, there are a lot of positives in these 2 chapters, so I don't really think it's all woe and doom and gloom on the nations that surround Judah, because there are sections that are about the importance of trusting in the Lord for salvation. But this woe begins with a woe upon Assyria and the judgment that they are going to bring to Judah. Isaiah 33:1 says, Woe to you, destroyer, while you were not destroyed, and he who is treacherous, while others did not deal treacherously with him. As soon as you are finished destroying, you will be destroyed. As soon as you cease to deal treacherously, others will deal treacherously with you. So the destroyer is the Assyrian Empire, who is just laying waste to the known world. And this chapter is focused more on the God who has the power to wipe out the Assyrians than the wickedness of Assyria itself. And so we see our call to come near to the Lord in Isaiah 34:1 and 2. Draw near, O nations, to hear and listen, O peoples. Let the earth and all it contains hear, and the world and all that springs from it. For the Lord's indignation is against all the nations, and his wrath against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to slaughter. And the nation of Edom in this section stands in the place of all the enemies of Israel. Edom, which should be closely aligned to Judah, especially at this time for support, are cursed as they are attacking Judah to take advantage of what Assyria is doing from the north. And so we read about this in Isaiah 34:5 and 6. For my sword is not satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom and upon the people whom I have devoted to destruction. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is sated with fat, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Isaiah 28 through 34 is a section that is calling on the people of Judah not to trust in their neighbors who have surrounded them, which is the same message that Isaiah has been preaching since the very beginning of this book. I think in some ways, if we wanted a modern-day illustration of Isaiah, it would be like an American politician who spent the last couple of decades in Congress always running on the same issue to his constituency. And the issue that he always ran on was cut spending. And the people in his district continued to vote him in term after term, and he went to Washington year after year, railing against all the spending. We've got to get the budget lower. He's talking about the dangers of overspending year after year and deficits and debts. And as the spending continues to rise, this politician continues to say the same thing. Stop spending beyond your means. We are wasting money on the creditors and the debt that we need to pay, but no one is listening to that man who says stop spending. And that is Isaiah. Isaiah has one basic message for the people of the Lord, but no one is listening to him. The message is trust in God. Don't depend upon the surrounding nations. Judgment will come upon those who trust in idols, so please trust in the Lord. And outside of a short reprieve from Hezekiah, the message of Isaiah is ignored again and again and again. And this brings us to the grand conclusion of our section we have today, which, like I said, Isaiah 28 through 35, introduces the narrative section in Isaiah 36 through 39. And in the same way that Isaiah chapter 6, that heavenly vision where Isaiah got the viewpoint of God's throne room, the angels and the seraphim to show us Isaiah's message is legitimate. This is a message that should be heard. It should be dependent upon. Ahaz, you can trust in the God of this power. Isaiah now in Isaiah 35 gets a vision not of heaven, but of the earth in the future. And that is Hezekiah, people of Judah, you can trust in the Lord because of the great promises that he brings for those on the earth. So now when Isaiah goes before Hezekiah, encouraging him to pray, to ask the Lord for forgiveness and protection from a large, destructive northern neighbor, they can look to what they saw in Isaiah 35 and say, if that's the future of God's people, then we can trust in God today. Now, Isaiah 35 is one of my two favorite chapters, probably not just in Isaiah, but in all of the Bible. Isaiah 35 and 55 are two chapters that have a special place in my heart. And I say this now to you so that you can know a use for Isaiah 35 and then later for Isaiah 55. And that is, I love to read Isaiah 35 with Christians who are on their deathbed, with those who know that they only have a couple of days, a couple of weeks left, and then they are going to go home to glory if Christ does not return first. I love to read Isaiah 35, and in the same way, for the same reasons, Isaiah 55, because this gives us hope for what God is going to do for his people in this world. It may not happen in your lifetime. It may not happen in mine. And I believe the promise of Isaiah 35 is even sweeter when we know the days of our life is coming to an end. And we know the prophecy won't be fulfilled in our lifetime. Because I believe Isaiah 35 lets us know that God is not done with us, and God is not done with us in this world. And when he restores us to this world, it will be even better than it is today. Isaiah 35 is a prophecy of the end times. I personally hold it as a prophecy of the millennial kingdom, when Jesus Christ will return and establish his kingdom on earth in Jerusalem to reign for 1,000 years. There's actually nothing explicit in this chapter itself to distinguish it from the new heavens and the new earth, the eternal state following them. So I don't want to be dogmatic in that view. My reason for tying it to Isaiah 35 more has to deal with my belief that the vast majority of the end-time prophecies that are given in the Old Testament are designed to be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom as prophecies for the people of God. But this could be the new heavens and the new earth. We just can't be positive about it. So we could say this is a picture of the end times, the millennial kingdom, and the new heaven and the new earth. And we're looking forward to what God is going to do for his people at the end. And at the end, there will be three major changes on the earth. The great restoration of planet Earth. The first thing that we're going to see is that the land on planet Earth will be transformed. Isaiah 35, 1 and 2 say, the wilderness and the desert will be glad, and the Arabah will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will blossom profusely and rejoice with rejoicing and shout of joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Now skip down to verse 7. The scorched land will become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water, in the haunt of jackals its resting place. Grass becomes reeds and rushes. So the areas of this world that are today lifeless and barren, desert and uninhabitable, that land will become fertile and full. The broken will be made whole. This world will be better than it has ever been before in every single way. Not only will the land be transformed, but also the people will be transformed. We see this in verses 5 and 6. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. The lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. Not only will we endure better conditions than we have ever seen before, but our physical disabilities will be removed. I have been enduring fake teeth in my mouth for more than 10 years, and I hate them. And I'm waiting for that day when they'll be able to fully grow out, and I'll have the smile that I've always wanted to have with my own front teeth. Everyone will be able to leap up and go on runs. They'll be able to run races with Craig and myself. And I think that that's actually in the last part in the Hebrew. I think a literal translation of Isaiah 35:6 might end with something like, and the church will run with cheetahs with Craig and Sean. I think that's how it's supposed to go. Our bodies, the people of the kingdom will be transformed. And the third and final aspect of this period of restoration is that our relationship with God will be transformed. Isaiah 35:8 says, a highway will be there, a roadway. It will be called the highway of holiness. And then skip down to verse 10. And the ransomed of the Lord will return and come with joyful shouting to Zion. With everlasting joy upon their heads, they will find gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. The picture of the highway of holiness and the ransomed of the Lord returning is the picture that we will finally be able to travel and have face-to-face direct access with the Lord. Emmanuel, the sprout, the cornerstone who we've been hoping for will reign in Zion, and we will have access to our King. So what we're looking for in the final days, what we're looking for in the great restoration is a transformation of the land, a transformation of the people, and a transformation of our relationship with the Lord. And that is the hope that God wants His people to have as the Assyrians are bearing down on them from the north. So through first the series of 6 woes in Isaiah 28 through 34, and then through the prophecy of restoration in Isaiah chapter 35, Isaiah's goal is to prepare his people not to trust in some other nation, not to trust in themselves, but to depend upon the Lord their God. So there are the woes that are given for those who will trust in Egypt and Edom and the nations to the south, and there is blessing that is put forward to those who will place their faith in Jesus Christ. So as the Assyrians are preparing to decimate Judah, as we face our own challenges and trials where we feel like our lives are about to crumble to bits and we're to be left as ash in the past, let us remember to place our faith in God Most High. Let us remember the consequences of trusting in this world and the blessings for those who trust in the Lord.